A U.S.-owned oil tanker targeted in the Strait of Hormuz, one of several attacked by Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. The devastation caused to the vessels, which can hold up to hundreds of millions of dollars worth of crude.
Deploying the venerable A-10 Warthog attack aircraft. That's not just a 50-year-old plane, it's something beloved by ground troops, firing nearly 4,000 rounds a minute of highly...
The most dangerous aircraft over Hormuz was not American. It was a 50-year-old Iranian F-14, flying with parts Washington thought had vanished decades ago, staring down a U.S. carrier strike group inside the narrowest oil choke point on Earth. And for 14 minutes, nobody fired. That is the part that does not make sense. Because the U.S. Navy had the carrier, the destroyers, the Aegis radars, the F divided by a -18s, the submarines nobody talks about. On paper, Iran should have backed away. Instead, Tehran sent a relic from the Shah's Air Force into the one place where a mistake could move 20 million barrels of oil a day. So the real question is not why Iran challenged the carrier. The real question is who wanted those 14 minutes to happen. Watch the strait. At its narrowest point, Hormuz is barely 21 miles wide. But the actual shipping lanes are even tighter. Roughly 2 miles in, 2 miles out, separated by a buffer zone that suddenly feels very small when radar screens start filling with hostile aircraft, fast boats, drones, and missiles hiding on the coast. This is not open ocean. This is a hallway. And inside that hallway, a U.S. carrier is not just a ship. It is a floating city with more than 5,000 sailors, up to 70 aircraft, and a political weight heavier than its 100,000 tons of steel. But a carrier in Hormuz has one problem. It has nowhere to disappear. Iran knows this. The Pentagon knows this. Every tanker captain between Fujairah and Basra knows this. And then came the radar contact. 2 aircraft lifting from Iranian airspace. Not modern Su-35s. Not stealth fighters. Not even something new enough to impress a defense expo. F-14 Tomcats. The same swing-wing interceptors made famous by American naval aviation, sold to Iran before the revolution, abandoned by Washington after 1979, and kept alive by one of the strangest black market engineering projects in modern military history. That was the first message. Iran was not sending its best plane. It was sending its most symbolic one. A weapon America built. A weapon America lost. A weapon America could not fully kill. The U.S. carrier group moved through the southern corridor with escorts spread around it like chess pieces. A Ticonderoga-class cruiser or Burke-class destroyer would have been watching the air picture through Aegis. E-2D Hawkeye radar aircraft would have been up or ready. Super Hornets would have been available on the deck. Everything was rehearsed. Until the Iranian fighters did not turn away. At first, it looked like theater. Iran does this. Fly close. Probe reactions. Make noise for domestic media. Remind everyone that the strait is not a neutral highway but a loaded gun pointed at the global economy. But then the closing speed changed. The Tomcats moved toward the carrier's outer defensive bubble. Not fast enough to be an obvious attack. Not slow enough to be ignored. That is the art. In the Persian Gulf, escalation is not a switch. It is a dial. 1 degree at a time. A radar lock that lasts 2 seconds too long. A drone that drifts 5 miles too close. A radio call that goes unanswered. A missile boat that suddenly accelerates. A fighter that crosses an invisible line. And invisible lines are where wars begin. The American side had choices. Launch fighters. Illuminate the targets. Issue warnings. Move the escorts. Shift the carrier's course. Prepare electronic warfare. But every action would be read by Tehran, Moscow, Beijing, Riyadh, and every insurance desk in London as a signal. That is why those 14 minutes mattered. They were not just military minutes, they were political minutes. And somewhere in that window, one question became impossible to ignore. Why use F-14s? Iran has newer threats. Ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, Shahid drones, fast attack craft, mines, coastal batteries hidden in caves and trucks. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy was built for exactly this kind of fight. Not a clean battle at sea, but a swarm, a trap, a fog of targets that forces the U.S. Navy to make the first visible move. So why send 2 ancient interceptors? Because the F-14 is not merely an aircraft in Iran. It is a message from before the revolution. In the 1970s, Iran was America's armed pillar in the Gulf. The Shah bought some of the most advanced aircraft on Earth. The F-14 came with the AWG-9 radar and the AGM-54 Phoenix missile, a long-range weapon designed to kill Soviet bombers before they could threaten U.S. carriers. Then 1979 shattered the alliance. American technicians left. Spare parts dried up. Washington assumed time would ground the fleet. It did not. Iran cannibalized airframes, reverse-engineered components, built domestic substitutes, smuggled parts, modified missiles, turned a stranded fleet into a national myth. So when an Iranian F-14 points its nose at an American carrier, it is saying something specific. Your weapon still flies for us. But that was only the surface. The deeper move was geography. A U.S. carrier is most comfortable when it controls distance. It projects power from hundreds of miles away.
It creates a bubble. Aircraft push outward.
Destroyers screen threats. Submarines watch below. Satellites watch above. Hormuz compresses all of that. Missiles can be fired from shore. Drones can be launched from trucks. Small boats can appear from coves. Civilian traffic clutters the radar picture. Every tanker becomes background noise. Every fishing vessel becomes a question. In open ocean, the carrier stretches the battlefield.
In Hormuz, Iran folds it.
That is the hidden advantage, not superiority.
Compression.
The Tomcats were never likely to sink the carrier.
That was not the point.
Their job was to force the American commander into a decision under global observation. If the U.S. reacted aggressively, Tehran could claim provocation. If the U.S. did nothing, Tehran could claim deterrence. If someone misread a radar track, the strait could close before diplomats even found a microphone. And then oil markets would move before warships did. 20% of the world's petroleum liquids pass through this corridor.
Not around it, through it. Saudi exports, Emirati exports, Kuwaiti cargoes, Iraqi shipments,
Qatari LNG nearby. Insurance rates, shipping schedules, refinery margins, consumer prices, all hanging from a strip of water narrower than many American cities. That is why silence from Washington was not weakness.
It was calculation.
The first instinct in a crisis is to ask why America did not answer louder. But the better question is why Iran wanted America to answer at all.
The Tomcats kept coming.
Inside the carrier's operations room, there would have been no drama music, just voices,
coordinates, altitudes, bearing, range, identification,
rules of engagement, radio challenges,
track numbers,
officers repeating words because one misunderstood syllable can become a missile launch. The Iranians knew that tempo. They were not just testing hardware, they were testing nerves. And here is where the obvious story breaks. Most people imagine the confrontation as Iran versus the United States.
Two flags, two militaries, two enemies.
But Hormuz is never only two players. China is watching because it buys Gulf energy and studies American naval reactions like a textbook. Russia is watching because every crisis that distracts Washington has strategic value. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are watching because a closed strait turns their infrastructure into leverage and vulnerability at the same time. Israel is watching because Iranian escalation in the Gulf rarely stays in the Gulf. And inside Iran, there are always two conversations, the official one broadcast to the world, and the internal one between the regular military, the Revolutionary Guards, the clerical establishment, and the men who decide how close to the cliff they can walk without falling. That is the hidden player.
Not one person, a faction.
The faction that benefits from proving the regime can still humiliate American power without triggering American fire. Because after years of sanctions, assassinations, sabotage, cyber attacks, drone wars, tanker seizures, and shadow strikes, Tehran has learned one rule. Do not fight America where America is strongest. Fight America where America is constrained. A carrier's strength is overwhelming firepower. A carrier's weakness is that using it can become a political earthquake. That is why the Iranian move was so sharp.
Two F-14s did not need to win a dogfight.
They only needed to create a moment where every American option carried a cost.
Launch fighters, escalation. Lock radar, escalation.
Fire warning shots,
escalation. Turn away, optics. Stay course, risk. 14 minutes.
That is long enough for an aircraft to cover more than 100 miles. Long enough for commanders to request authorization. Long enough for a missile battery ashore to receive targeting updates. Long enough for a drone feed to be clipped, edited, and prepared for propaganda. Long enough for a sailor on a destroyer to wonder whether the next sound is an alarm or history. And then came the reveal that matters most. The Tomcats were not alone. Not visibly, perhaps. Not in the cinematic sense. But strategically, no aircraft over Hormuz flies alone. Behind them would have been coastal radars, electronic listening posts, missile crews, patrol boats, drones, and command networks built to turn the strait into a layered trap. The F-14s were the glove.
The fist was on shore.
That is why the U.S. response remained controlled. American commanders did not just see two aircraft. They saw the possibility of a kill chain forming around the carrier group.
A radar paints the ship.
A drone confirms position.
A fast boat rushes forward. A missile battery waits.
A mine scare freezes traffic. A propaganda channel frames the first American shot. And suddenly the question is no longer whether the U.S. can destroy the threat.
Of course it can.
The question is what happens 10 minutes after it does. That is the logic of Iranian deterrence.
Not victory. Punishment.
Not control of the sea.
Denial of the sea.
not matching the U.S. Navy ship for ship, but making every mile of water expensive, crowded, and politically radioactive. In that sense, the aging F-14 was perfect. A modern stealth aircraft would say Iran is preparing for war. A drone would look disposable. A fast boat would look reckless. But an F-14 says memory, pride, defiance, restraint and threat in the same silhouette. It is old enough to be symbolic, capable enough to be taken seriously, and American enough to sting. The carrier did not retreat. That matters. The U.S. Navy continued its mission because turning back would have handed Tehran the image it wanted most. But it also did not overreact, because firing first in Hormuz is not a tactical decision.
It is a global event.
So both sides performed a dangerous dance.
Iran pushed. America absorbed. Iran approached the line.
America refused to draw it publicly, and the world saw almost nothing. That is the quiet truth of these confrontations. The most important moments in the Gulf often happen without a dramatic explosion. No missile trail. No burning ship. No presidential address. Just radar tracks. Radio warnings.
A turn. A pause. Silence.
Then suddenly the aircraft peel away, and everyone pretends the crisis ended because the immediate danger passed.
But it did not end. It moved.
Because after a confrontation like that, every actor updates their mental map. Iranian commanders learn how far they got. U.S. commanders learn which channels worked, which timelines were tight, which sensors were cluttered, which adversary patterns changed. Insurance markets learn nothing until they learn everything at once. And the next time, the distance closes faster. That is the part to watch. Not the F-14s themselves. They are dramatic, but they are not the decisive weapon. The decisive weapon is the pattern Iran is building: pressure without war, confrontation without responsibility, escalation that stays just beneath the threshold where the United States can justify a crushing response. This is gray zone warfare at sea. And Hormuz is its perfect laboratory. Because the strait gives Tehran something rare: leverage over countries that do not want to be involved.
Japan, India, China, South Korea,
European economies, energy importers who may dislike Iran's behavior but fear a war even more. That is why Washington's silence was not empty. It was meant to deny Iran the headline.
No shoot down.
No dramatic retaliation. No easy martyrdom. No viral clip of American fighters chasing Iranian aircraft across the Gulf. The U.S. response was to keep the carrier moving, keep the lanes open, and refuse to let Tehran turn a tactical probe into a strategic spectacle. But here is the danger. Restraint only works when both sides understand it the same way. If Washington reads restraint as discipline, but Tehran reads it as hesitation, the next probe gets bolder. If Tehran reads American patience as political caution, but an American commander reads the next approach as a genuine attack, the latter snaps. And once it snaps in Hormuz, there is no clean battlefield. There are tankers, civilian crews,
pipelines, ports, air bases, missile sites, drones, satellites, proxy groups,
cable networks, markets opening in Asia before the Pentagon finishes its statement. At 15 minutes, the tension would have been almost unbearable. Because this is the moment when a pilot's hand matters. A radar operator's judgment matters. A commander's tone matters. One aircraft shifts altitude. One destroyer changes emissions. One missile system wakes up. And everyone asks the same question at the same time.
Is this the beginning?
That is why the 14-minute confrontation is bigger than the aircraft involved. It exposed the central paradox of American power in the Gulf. The United States can dominate a war, but Iran can dominate the moment before war. Those are different battles. America's advantage is overwhelming once the shooting starts. Iran's advantage is manipulating the fear of the shooting starting at all. And for 14 minutes, that fear became the battlefield. The full picture is not that Iranian F-14s challenged a carrier and scared it away.
They did not.
The full picture is not that America was powerless.
It was not.
The full picture is that Iran found a narrow slice of time and geography where American superiority had to be filtered through politics, oil, allies, shipping lanes, global markets, and the risk of miscalculation.
That is the chess move, not checkmate. Tempo.
Iran forced the carrier group to play at Iran's speed, inside Iran's chosen corridor, under Iran's preferred rules: ambiguity, proximity, pressure, deniability. And the carrier's victory was not dramatic. It was refusing to give Iran the explosion it wanted while still refusing to yield the water. That is a harder win than it looks. Because in Hormuz, the most dangerous outcome is not always the missile fired. Sometimes it is the lesson learned. Tehran learned the Tomcat still has power as a symbol. Washington learned the strait remains a compressed battlefield where seconds can carry strategic weight. Regional capitals learned that the next crisis may not begin with a drone swarm or a missile strike, but with an old jet crossing a line no one publicly admits exists. And somewhere in an operations room, on one side of the Gulf or the other, a file was updated.
Range, reaction time,
Radio procedure. Carrier position.
Political response. 14 minutes became data.
And data becomes doctrine. So when the F-14s turned back, the story did not end. It simply disappeared from view. The next confrontation may not involve Tomcats. It may begin with a tanker losing steering near Abu Musa, or a drone flying too close to Al Dhafra, or a missile battery activating for 30 seconds on the Iranian coast, or a fast boat crossing the bow of a destroyer at night.
The shape will change. The trap will not.
Because Hormuz is not just a strait.
It is a pressure chamber.
And the next time that pressure rises, the world may not get 14 minutes.
It may get 4.